Everybody talks about engagement, but what does that mean? What happens when you're engaged? What happens if you're not engaged? How do you know you're engaged? How does it feel to be engaged? How does it feel not to be engaged? Because that's the crux of it.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Leadership Trademarked Podcast. In this episode, we're doing things a little differently. We've taken the time to dive deep into the central theme of this season, employee engagement. After more than 3 hours of thoughtful discussion, we realized just how challenging it is to define employee engagement. Everyone's experiences and perspectives vary, and engagement means something different to each individual. That's why in this episode, we present a model, a framework for understanding employee engagement. This framework sparks an engaging conversation about leadership tools, navigating uncertainty in the workforce, the lingering effects of COVID on social behavior, and much more. Our key takeaway, backed by research from Google's parent company Alphabet, truly engaging workplaces are led by leaders who are human. To bring this insight to life, each of our featured leaders shares concrete tools and rituals they've implemented throughout their careers to foster a more human and interconnected workforce. We hope you enjoy this insightful discussion. Leslie, take it away.
So I kind of break down engagement. I look at it slightly differently. I break engagement down into purpose and methods. So if I think about what's the purpose of engagement, it really goes back to those leadership goals: building trust, showing compassion, providing stability, and creating hope. So that's really the purpose. And then there's all kinds of stats and data that you can pull together that shows that, that kind of a workplace is more productive, and there's less turnover, and there's less sick time, and there's just gobs and gobs of stuff on that.
Right. So just to interrupt.
Just let me finish.
But when you do that, Leslie, as a focus, you immediately encourage inclusivity and belonging, which drives productivity and performance.
Exactly. That's exactly what happens.
Thank you.
How do you do that? Well, what you do is, first of all, you exhibit kindness. And kindness is about caring, basic manners. I mean, this is the stuff we learned in kindergarten, right?
Yeah, but they don't learn it there anymore.
Well, or we think it's not important anymore.
Right.
So that kindness thing is just table stakes. The next part of that is, I wrote this down. Respect. And respect is all about, it's not about agreeing with somebody. It's allowing them to be themselves. It's acknowledging that they have a point of view, that they have something to offer. It's showing interest in what they have to contribute and what they have to say. It can even go so far as showing them the respect to stick to your guns if you don't agree. That's part of respect. I respect you enough to tell you that I think you're full of crap.
Yeah, you taught me that when I was 35.
And then the third part of that I see in all of that is listening, which is also a fundamental skill, but actually listening to what someone is saying, listening with intent, listening to understand, listening to learn. Because the other thing that is very challenging for all of us when we move into leadership roles is that we've been rewarded consistently for knowing how, knowing what, being the knowledge source. And suddenly, as a leader, it's not your job to provide the answers. It's your job to listen and to hear what other people have to say in terms of the answers, because frankly, they're the ones that are going to have to do the job. And if they haven't bought in, they're not going to be.
And to your point, Leslie, unlike the days when I was moving up the system, today, the way it's done, or the technology that's taken over, or the timing on it, can change in a week or 2 weeks. I mean, I remember when I reached that level with big teams, and I would say, we got 3 rules here. First, you need to know, don't lie to me. Second of all, you need to know, I don't know what you do. Third of all, you need to know that I am counting on you to have the answers because I don't have them.
Right.
I don't have your
Doing that,
experience.
building the trust and
Right.
showing compassion and offering stability
Right.
and creating hope. Because you weren't the only person with answers.
I didn't have any answers. I didn't have that. I was supposed to get them to have the answers.
Leslie, I love you breaking engagement down into these 2 areas, purpose and methods. And you were very passionate about bringing up uncertainty at the beginning as a pattern that you were noticing in the other guests and what they were speaking to. How do you see uncertainty integrating into this framework that you've outlined here with purpose and methods? Where did the uncertainty lie? Was it uncertainty in the purpose? Was it uncertainty in the methods, and how to engage, if you could speak to that?
Oh, that's a good question. The place where I saw the uncertainty was just in terms of mostly from the external forces that create uncertainty. I mean, at a very basic level, uncertainty is, do you think it's going to rain today? Should I lug my umbrella around? Should I bring a sweater? Is this one going to be too hot? Am I, that kind of uncertainty. Other kinds of uncertainty are things like, will this company be in business tomorrow? Will I have my job tomorrow? Am I going to be blamed for something that goes wrong? What's the direction of the company that I'm working for today taking? Will I have a role in this tomorrow? So we deal with uncertainty all the time, and the volume and the intensity of that uncertainty goes up and down throughout our lives and throughout various cycles. And so every time we've had a speaker on, they talk about uncertainty in the workplace. And a lot of it in the last, 5 years was driven by COVID, because COVID was one of those moments where the world changed overnight. We were all hanging out together, and then suddenly we all had to go back into our caves. And then we had to figure out how to get food around to everybody. We had to figure out how to get the kids educated. We had to figure out how to keep the businesses open, keep the money moving and all of that. And so that was a huge change. And that affects us today because we're still trying to figure out what of those COVID methods and tools and systems that we put into place 5 years ago, what do we need to do and what do we need to change? I mean, Sylvia's got a big job doing that. And so all of the speakers have talked about uncertainty in terms of different stages of where they are. And then it also creates uncertainty in the workplace in terms of what are the jobs going to look like? How do I have to be prepared? How am I going to run my family and continue to work? Some families love working from home and others don't have the space to work from home. They found that very, very stressful. So there's uncertainty at all different kinds of levels. And the reality is we've always dealt with uncertainty, and it makes us behave differently depending on the intensity and the numbers of places. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I have a follow-up one.
Okay.
Because uncertainty has always existed, but at certain times there's either more or less uncertainty. I mean, COVID presents a new situation that people have to adapt to. We've never encountered this amount of professional workers at home needing to call in to do work. So we need to build out a virtual infrastructure, right? So there's uncertainties in how to do that. But in terms of employee engagement, if uncertainty has always existed, but more employees are being or feeling disengaged, is it that leaders have, forgotten the methods that work or are missing the methods?
I think we've abandoned leaders as a society. I think we've abandoned them. I think we've said, go out there and get this done. And we haven't really provided a lot of the development, mentoring, training,
Right.
method. I was listening to a guy on the radio yesterday because it was Remembrance Day, and he was talking about two organizations that he's familiar with. He's a former military person, and he also got an MBA at a Canadian school. And he said, in the military, the day you walk in, you are being prepared to lead people, and
Right.
not small groups, thousands of people. And
Right.
that's the training. That's more. They figure they can teach you anything else, but what they really want you to do is they want you to learn how to be a leader. Said he went to business school when he got out. He got an MBA, and he said there was nothing in there about leadership development. It's qualitative methodology and things like that. So I think we're very inconsistent in preparing people for leadership roles. And I think it's been exacerbated over the last several years because we have all been working from home, and it's probably more challenging to show, kindness and respect and listening when you're doing it always over Zoom or a digital tool.
This would be great to address in, what factors have changed or what's changed in the leadership landscape. This is both in the leadership landscape and at the demographic, the people who are being led side.
So, Sylvia, how would you feel about responding to those things that have changed?
Well, you know what I've been thinking about as you were talking is what has changed. And there's one huge things that have changed. We've gone through COVID. We've gone through a huge storm.
Yeah.
And so, when there is a big, global event like that lasts for, 2-3 years, as far as I can see, we're just coming out of, the storm. And so what we're seeing is now a more, okay, I'm out of the trauma. I'm finally out of the trauma. I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I hadn't seen him out for a while, and I said, "Hey, that's so nice to see you." And he says, "Yeah, I haven't been out, and and my wife hasn't been able to come out of the house still, so she has huge problems with going to gatherings still."
Yeah.
That's a huge impact on the workforce. That's a huge impact when you talk about how we operate and how we engage. Like, we finally got ourselves over, how to properly engage over Zoom, much like what we've experienced right now. And try to run a project, a program, deliver service, doing all of that. We had to go through a lot of learning. So what I see is, and I agree with a lot of things that you're saying, Roz, well said, there are other systemic changes, and in the same time, we have to acknowledge that we have been through a global impactful event that lasted for a long time. And now we're relearning, or we're just gotten ourselves out of the threat response. And, when I hear Leslie talk about uncertainty, I'm not sure that we have as much as uncertainty per se, but what I think we have is we still act like we have a lot of uncertainty. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
It's not so much that we don't have uncertainties, that we think we don't know, but we actually do know.
So I have a big point to make on that. When COVID hit, what happened in the workplace is that everybody that was front facing on the front line had to come to work. Everybody else was sent home to work at a distance. Now that changed the balance of everything, including the productivity of those people who went home to work. In fact, the statistics were that people were 10 to 15% more productive. And they were more productive because they didn't have these bosses walking into their office and calling them on the phone and bumping them in the cafeteria and dragging them off task. Plus, talk about control, no control. For a lot of these people, especially in Toronto, they can't afford to live downtown Toronto. So they're riding GO trains and they're driving on highways for up to 2 hours twice a day, plus the gas, which means they don't see their kids in the morning. They get home just in time for dinner to be over, and they're exhausted. And the impact on that travel for them, they couldn't give up the job. So here they were, back and forth and front line. And so a lot of engagement. It was like a class distinction, it was a split. And the ones who were frontline or who were younger workers in the workplace were terrified of losing their jobs because they wouldn't be able to feed the kids, pay the rent, yada, 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 yada. And so that has created, I call it word salad or cocktail party conversation, where people are not actually talking to each other. Everybody's just being good. And the leaders have no idea how to handle this conflict because they haven't been trained and they're not grown up enough. Leslie, take it.
We just wanted to add that since COVID, Gallup has done some study on engagement, and they've got some interesting data that shows that people who are working, and this kind of blends in what both Sylvia and Roz have been saying, that the people who are at home exclusively are among the least engaged. The people who are at the top of the engagement are the ones that are doing a bit of both. And it seems, and I'm wondering, I don't know this, but what I'm wondering is that doesn't actually summarize what both of you have been saying, that, you know, the people who are traveling long distance, they've got some work-life balance back in their life, but they're back in the office maybe 1 day or 2 days a week for that one-to-one engagement. Because the people who are, so the lowest engaged are the all remote. The second lowest are the all in the office. And the highest engagement are the people that are doing a mix of the two. COVID was a real pivot point in our ability to engage staff as well. Like we had to learn how to do this all over again.
And I think Leslie is where I'm seeing a lot of relearning or new learning, just because now we're not as scared, we're not as, you know, we're less traumatized now, so we're starting to see a lot of you know, it's almost like we've gone down, now we're starting to come back up in terms of that engagement piece. So if I'm not coming in because I don't have to and I don't have to travel and I'm okay, and you know what, I'm an introvert too, so I'd rather be by myself and, you know, it's all good from my end. It is the leader's job to engage with me, right? So because I've seen actually articles on this where, you know, you have staff who maybe, again, introvert, they don't want, or the type of work that they do, it's a lot of, you know, focus work, and it's not really in collaboration with teams, right? Although you may be part of a team, but you don't really need to interact as much.
Yeah.
But it's really the leader's job to make sure that they check in with you, and they, you know, and that you know, you offer that trust and empathy and comfort, and so that, to me, there's a two-way street there. But the fact that they're fully remote or not, it actually could be a positive thing. It's not always a negative thing. You don't collaborate necessarily just by coming in person. Certainly socially is a good, huge factor.
Why is it that the hybrid model creates a greater sense of engagement than fully in person? And it could be that hybrid meets more of the workers' needs. But could it be also that the shift as a result of COVID created a shift in how workplaces were designed, and they seem to be more designed for the hybrid model and less to support the needs of people going in 5 days a week in person? Is there anything there to explore that you've seen?
I want to talk a little bit about this. So hybrid work is not new, although we've seen it implemented in a lot more to greater extent post-COVID, or during COVID, of course, and then post-COVID. But a lot of organizations, such as financial institutions, had already moved into a hybrid, workplace, so to say. So hybrid has been around for a while, not to the extent that it is right now, for sure. Not to say that, but I think it's important to note that hybrid is also allows a lot of flexibility and choice for staff if it's done properly. So hybrid programs, can be just as such, to say, yes, you work some days in the office, some days at home, and you choose. That is, it's about flexibility, a choice, being autonomous. And there's a lot of research that shows that actually that is the best that you can do for your employees, because you're giving them autonomy. And that's really, really powerful. So hybrid programs are really good if they're done well. Where hybrid programs are not so well is when you're prescriptive, to say, you know what, you must come in on Tuesday and you must come in on Wednesday and you must do this and you must do that. Well, if I'm going to come in and I'm going to be on video calls all day, that's not a good implementation of a hybrid program. Hybrid is actually talks about activity-based working. So I choose where I work based on the activity that I do. If I'm typically it's an office work, right? So, I can come in on Tuesdays because that's when we have team meetings, and I can see my boss, and I can do this, and I can grab a coffee with Mary.
And Sylvia, you are very senior and you can do what the hell you want. So a lot of people have no permission to do anything except what they're told. Now, 25 years ago, I worked hybrid. I took a job and I said, I can't do it. I got a small kid.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you got to take it. I said, all right, here's the deal. You can have me in person at 9:30 in the morning, and I'm gone by 3. And the time before and after that, you can get me at home. But you see, I had the privilege, and I was trusted enough, and I was very productive. Part of that deal was also, I'll be there when I say I am, except when I'm not going to be there because the kid's sick. But I'll still get on the deliverables because I'll work at home, I'll work in the evenings, I'll work on the weekends. But I don't think that's really what's going on out there.
Well, so we've spoken about different models that at least exist in today's workforce. You can come in fully in person, you could work hybrid, or you can work fully from home. And we've spoken about how they capture different levels of engagement, but engagement is still an issue, at least at a larger picture. Employees aren't as engaged as maybe they could be. So I want to tie this back to methods and purpose, and maybe open up a dialogue around, where are leaders failing to engage their workers?
Do we have a definition, a simple definition of engagement? Like, I know what it means. I think we all know what it means, but it may mean something slightly different for everybody. Everybody talks about engagement, but what does that mean? What happens when you're engaged? What happens if you're not engaged? How do you know you're engaged? How does it feel to be engaged? How does it feel not to be engaged? Because that's the crux of it. That people are, to Leslie's point, uncertain about what they're responsible for. And I don't know about you guys, but if I'm not sure what I'm accountable for, I don't get that engaged with what's going on because I don't know what the hell's going on or how I fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm junior, I'm not going to take that chance because I might get disciplined or punished or fired or embarrassed, or because it isn't an open forum. So I think if we're going to go do this deep dive, and maybe Finn, you could tell us what engagement means from your point of view.
Well, how about let's each do it? Sylvia, would you like to start?
Yes, it's a very good question. So I think defining it is really cool. I would say it's really an emotional commitment to the organization and the goals, and what is the team. So it really is that emotional connection to the workplace.
And
As
what
long
is
as we think about workplace, I'm talking in terms of workplace context, right?
and
Because there's all kinds of other engagements.
okay.
Right?
So, Miss Introvert, how do you feel when you're engaged? Mad, sad, glad, or scared?
I feel committed. I feel safe. I feel like I'm contributing, and that's what drives me. That's what
Okay.
I would.
Leslie, how do you feel when you're engaged?
When I'm engaged, I feel like I know where I fit in and I know what my role is in the bigger picture. I feel that I can have the authority to make decisions without asking for permission. And I feel connected to the other members of the team, that we're all working together as a unit towards something, towards a goal that will help all of us.
Okay. When I'm engaged, I know I'm engaged because I feel trusting, not safe, trusting. And mostly I feel curious. I'm on fire. I'm curious. I'm imagining. I'm in my vision part of me. And when those two things are not happening, well, I'm bored. But that's me. Now, maybe I'm bored because I don't fit in. It doesn't matter. I'm bored. I just disengaged. So, Finn, how do you feel when you're engaged?
I feel encouraged. I feel that what is going to come out of my mouth is something that other people want to hear. And they're pushing me to apply myself, to be curious. And I'm not afraid to do those things.
So
when I'm not engaged, I feel like, what am I doing here? They don't want to hear what I'm saying.
Right.
They don't want my attention because they haven't asked for it or made any sense of intention that they want it.
Right. So when people are not engaged, those feelings don't exist. And I have to work with a lot of people who don't feel engaged. So none of those words come up, you guys. Okay. So then I say, okay, well, how do you feel then? And they say, I feel like I've been dismissed.
Yeah.
Okay. Dismissed. And I said, and how does that feel? Insulting. And then what happens? And well, then it, whatever. So perhaps the way to move into this is, and so I'm also thinking, so Finn's 23, Sylvia's, how old are you?
50.
Leslie's
70.
70, and I'm 75. So we have a big span and different experiences through our work life. And yet the four of us still are nodding to these words. So if we're doing that, then I'm pretty comfortable that anybody listening to us is going to be on board. I know a lot of people right now who are very invested in doing a good job because they need the job and they're excited about it. But they have no idea what engagement means.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they don't know, they're still inspired because they got the job and, gee, I have a desk, or, now I have an office, or now I'm a manager. And I don't mean to sound patronizing, but, they're thrilled, they're excited, they're enthused. And then the enthusiasm starts to wane. They say, well, this really isn't what I thought the job would be, or I really can't get any clarity from my boss, or I hate doing that, or the person I'm supposed to work with, and she's such a bitch, or he's such a mouthy guy, and there you go. There's the conflict. And then the flip side of that is when that's eliminated, because people are engaged, because they ask and they listen and they pay attention and they don't argue with each other, the polar opposite happens. And that's where the creativity comes out. And the honesty. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to change the world, guys, but I am saying that nobody talks about this stuff. It's all big secret.
I would say that we are restarting to talk about this, and going back to what I was talking, post trauma, is that there are a lot of conversations about engagement. In fact, some of the biggest topics that we have in the workforce is engagement and leadership. And I think it's kind of like the return, right? It's the restart. And it might just be the optimist in me, but I do actually see a lot of movement in that. And the introduction of the hybrid work is actually a good thing. And that has had a huge positive impact. Do we need refinement? Do we need more leadership training? Do we need to do more of this, that, and the other? Absolutely. But I do actually see a lot of traits that have returned. That good old, here's a structured leadership program. Here is a structured this. And so that it is returning. So I do see that. I think again we've gone through it sort of like to the deep end, and now we're starting to come back up, and it will probably take a couple of years to actually have a full return. But did we ever have a full, perfect employee engagement? I mean, think about it. Did we? So that's what I'm trying to say is like, what are we comparing to here? Because leadership has been a struggle for many,
but
for a long time, right?
Okay.
Because we shifted technology.
So the job of a leader has been, and always will be, to have their team engaged. Now, the majority of leaders are male. They don't work on engagement. I mean, I've been coaching these guys that are 50 and 60 for 20the years. And
that's why they come to you. They come to you
I know, but
them better,
But the point that I'm making, Sylvia, is that these are a small percentage of senior leaders who decide to get down on it and get their back up off the wall and figure out how to do it. Okay. But for every one of them, there's 10 others who are just stirring up the shit. So we got to be careful not to be too political here. Leslie.
I suspect that
and even in our own discussion of what does engagement mean, engagement is it's an abstract feeling, and we find it difficult to measure it. And when we find things, I mean, what do we revert to when we get anxious or we feel uncertain? We revert to the things that we've always been rewarded for. And we haven't been rewarded for having a highly engaged workforce. We've been rewarded for meeting budgets, meeting deadlines, meeting goals, profitability goals, those things that are easy to count. And so part of this is we need to figure out how do we, not only what is engagement, but how do we measure it, and how do we reward leaders for creating an engaging environment?
I really liked Leslie's point. I think it's very strong that people are very data driven, and they tend to, at least my understanding is that if any decisions are to be made at a high level to change behaviors, they typically aren't made without seeing evidence behind them. And engagement has been hard to measure. But if engagement can be measured and shows at least that higher engagement leads to the things that leads to the key performance indicators that people want in business, well, then you can start to create programs around rewarding engagement.
I recently came across this story, and you may already know this. It's Project Aristotle, and this was a project, and I don't know why I haven't come across this. It was in 2016 that Google, the great minds of Google, wanted to study what makes a perfect team. Okay, so they were so focused to say, what is it that makes those teams so great? So they looked at a whole whack of different things like communication styles and leadership behaviors. And they even looked at gender differences, because you mentioned that earlier, demographics. But it didn't matter how deep they dug. They basically couldn't get to the answer. Like, what was that perfect? How do you get a perfect team? Anyway, so they didn't give up, though. They started to shift their focus. So instead of looking at traits or talents, they started to look at how did the group actually interact. So like the behaviors, the how we interact with each other right now, for example. So then they had a huge epiphany. They started to see very, very quickly that it was really about being human. So two things they came up that they realized. The first thing was that is how balanced their participation was. So meaning like each voice everybody had a voice. So it didn't matter. It wasn't about the boss saying something. It wasn't about Mary kiboshing the meeting or whatever the case is. Everybody had more equal participation. But the second one, which I think we've talked about many times, was empathy. So really it was about paying attention to say, hey, what's going on? Oh, you look sad, or did that bother you? Or how did I do here? So there was a lot of checkings afterwards, right? So in any case, at the end of it all, you know what it came down to? And when I kept thinking about this, the definition of engagement, at the end of it all, it came down to just the human connection. So just bringing it back to about, what is engagement and how do we measure it and so forth, is how do we measure that? Because and Finn, you said it right. If you have a highly performing team, they're going to be very productive. They're going to hit those. And so your KPIs, your budget, your revenues and so forth, you'll get a whole bunch of check marks, right? So it's not, it's about the leader, but it's about the team, right? And about that empathy. If I was to summarize what engagement is, it's about that human connectivity to the workplace.
That's right. That's right.
Do I feel at home?
Right.
Because where do we feel most creative and innovative and all of that? When I'm at home. Do I get that sense? How am I feeling when I get to work, when I'm on a call with my team or my boss? Do I feel like I can talk about, being open about what I really think? To say, no, we shouldn't get into this direction because, we're going to do that. Do I measure engagement at home with our kids and my husband? We don't. We just have it, right? And so I think it comes down to that.
And it starts with the leaders. I mean, the leaders breathe life into the environment that the people work in. So in context to what you've brought up here, leaders sound like they need to become more human. All of us can work at becoming more human, but each of you work at high enough levels to see and interact with leaders of all different varieties. And so you get a sense to how human each of these people are.
Yeah.
And the areas where there may be lacking their humanity and how they interact with people or how they envision the employees that are working for their company. And if you had to identify actionable things right now that leaders could take to start breathing that humanity back into their companies, where would it start?
I would make them feel at home, basically. And that's my approach to leadership, actually. And I'm not talking about, I'll make you a coffee, let me cook for you. I'm talking about make you feel safe. Just open that communication, having regular dialogue, having an understanding, building that relationship and trust.
I would ask a lot of questions and I would listen and say, a lot. And once I could feel the ebb and flow working, then I'd get into conversational. But it's I come to mama to begin with. And, this one might take half an hour to get there. This one might take 2 years to get there.
If I were advising somebody who is looking at leadership and they really want to know today what can they do to help inspire engagement, the first thing I think I would do is I would arm myself with facts. And for that reason, to understand the purpose of employee engagement. And there's lots of places where you can do this. I'd start actually with the Gallup website, and I would go in there and I would look at all of their, and they provide a lot of information on employee engagement for free. You don't have to have the $1 million a year corporate version. You can get lots of information. And I would start with the search on why is engagement important and what are the drivers of employee engagement. Those are the two questions I would ask.
Perfect. You can start the podcast.
And that also allows you to start a collaborative process with your peers and even your boss. And you can start to create, I don't know, maybe you have a weekly lunch or a weekly coffee, and you talk about engagement and some of the things that have worked and have worked or haven't worked or what you need help with. The second thing I would do, and I would go back to, these principles of what is my role as a leader? And that is to build trust, show compassion, provide stability, and create hope. And those are the things exactly that you and Sylvia have been talking about, Roz, is that humanity, that connection to other people. The third thing I would do, and this is because we keep coming back to this issue of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And if uncertainty is a roadblock in your group, then it's your job as a leader to help
fix it.
Move that roadblock.
Absolutely.
Not to do anybody's job. Nobody expects you to do their job. They don't even want you to do their job, but they want to have the tools and and the supplies that they need to get their job done. And if uncertainty is in the way, you have to deal with that. And it can be as simple as taking the uncertain items and put them in a checklist. I have control. I don't have control. I have control. I don't have control. And when things are uncontrollable, all you can control your response to them. So, I'm a person that lives in the north, so I think about winter, and it's that time of year. I have absolutely no control over winter weather, but I can put winter tires on my car. I can get out my boots and my hats and my mitts. And if I wake up one morning and there's ice all over, I've got my bag of ice melter and I can sprinkle it on the stairs so I don't break my neck running for the bus or whatever. So that's in that category of creating a plan so that you can respond to uncertainty. And those are the three things you can do: get the facts, focus on your primary roles, and make a plan for dealing with the uncertainty.
So this maybe isn't a point that's talked about as much when it comes to the topic of employee engagement. But when I brought up the last question, I said it starts from the top. The leader breathes life into the workplace. Sylvia makes it a home. So other people, when they're entering her home, they feel a sense of belonging. But ultimately, the leader at the top is still a person. And like therapists need their own therapists to keep doing what they're doing.
It's true.
So if employee engagement rests on the ability of the leader to breathe life into their workplace, what kind of systems can we be better putting in place to make sure that those leaders have the support that they need to keep doing that?
Yeah, we talked about that at in our leadership workshops about how leadership is a lonely business.
The loneliest job in the world.
That's right. It was important to create a network of others that you can touch base with and check in with and get ideas from, and just, really talk about what's going on and what are the roadblocks that you yourself are running into.
I think just like we defined engagement, I think getting into leadership, there are different perceptions because you are typically in charge of delivering something. So you're in charge of getting something done. Run this program, build this project, do this, build this building, and so forth. And one of the things that happens is then you get a team in order to do that. So then you become a people leader, right? So there's different mindsets, and there's a lot of bias around, well, I'm in charge of doing this. And sometimes leaders forget that you're actually a people leader, right? So you're, yes, you're in charge of doing this, but you're managing and you're in charge and leading this team in order to do that. So I see a lot of people leaders like when they transition from I'm in charge of a project to I'm now actually a people leader, that transition sometimes doesn't happen.
That's
One
right.
of the worst transitions, actually. And I see that a lot with project managers in particular, because I'm running a project. Of course, I'm good at leading. I've been doing this, and the other. But now you have a team, and managing people is not the same as managing projects. It's a whole lack of different skill set. And that's where, you may not have those tools in your bag because you never put them in the bag. You never had them. And so now you have to shift. So just going back to, we're talking about what's missing or and this is not a new problem, by the way. This has been there forever. This is just part of that journey towards becoming a good leader. And, some of them you may have already the tool like yourself you have it built in, right? Some people don't have that built in, right? Because your first objective is get this thing done. And the leading the people is a byproduct or it's just something. And with some leaders, it becomes an annoyance, like, oh my God, now I have to deal with that, and now I have the grievance and now I have to do this, because it's not seen as, to get to point B, you actually have to be a good leader to do that, right? And anyway, the point was really that it's kind of a new problem, but it's actually a very old problem.
Very old
And
problem.
I think we
It's very old problem.
it's a whole problem.
It's very, very old problem.
I actually think we have lots of tools. We have lots of tools. And now we're in better position now than we were years and years ago, because now you have access to information like this. Maybe too much information, but you do, right? You have access to Gallup free stuff where, when I didn't, 20 odd years ago, right? I would have to go and take a course, go hire Ross to coach me. I would have to do all of those other things, right? Now you have a lot more at your fingertips.
I think that point you just made really reinforces the importance of leadership and the next generation of leaders, because you're right. There's a huge difference between managing a project or managing input or managing administration and actually leading people.
Yeah.
And the leadership, the need for leadership isn't going to go away. We're not going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to substitute that with AI, even if we can do a lot of the managing stuff. So this is a really important question that Finn has asked. How do we continue to support leaders? How do we train the next generation of leaders? And I don't know, maybe that's a topic for a whole different session following this one. Because I'd have to think about that,
To wrap up this episode, to leave us on a great final note, I'm going to ask each of you to share not just how you like to inspire engagement in the workforce. For instance, Sylvia, you talked about you like to create a sense of people feeling at home. But if you could leave us with one concrete leadership ritual or one tool that you would apply to do this, what would it be?
I'm a stickler for one-on-ones. Like for me, I have to meet with my team, and I make it a very, very strict ritual. So I have daily huddles. I have one-on-ones with my staff. That connection is how I ensure that people are at home.
I use this method even when my kids were teenagers, which was really, really challenging. And I wouldn't get out of bed. When they were teenagers, I wouldn't get out of bed until I could tell each of them something that I really liked about them or really admired about what they had done. That was every day. So that was a big challenge. But in a work environment, I think on a weekly basis is enough. But specifically for all of the people who report to you directly, tell them some kind of an attaboy or something that you really like about them or that you really respect about them, and make that part of your weekly contacts and discussions.
Okay. I do something differently. When somebody is in the beginning stages of working with me or for me, I ask them what they want, what they're willing to do, how they're going to measure it, what's in the way, what do they expect. And there comes the conversation. And at the end of that, I say, how can I help? And then away we go. But I always put it on the real key is, what do you want? Yada, 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 yada. And what's in the way? What's in the way is what they're not telling me about what they want or what's really upsetting them. And until I can get understood, I can't help them.
Mm-hmm.
And it wastes my time and it discourages them. So that's what I do. And through that process too, can become quite friendly and also quite clear that, I don't think this is the right job for you. What about there?
I just wanted to add, actually, it's one of the things that I do that you just, brought it up as you were talking and it always freaked people out is I would ask them, where do you want to be in 5 years? And really, how can I help you get there? And, like I would even say, hey, like, what about this job? And, sometimes be like, are you trying to get rid of me? Are you trying to, and it was really, just to your point, Roz, is just getting them to, it's more than just them working for me. It's actually a human being.
They work for themselves.
For themselves to say,
Yeah.
where do you want to be? How
So,
can I help you get there? And so,
So when I first met Sylvia all those years ago, she kind of tracked me down. That's whatever. So we're sitting talking. And I said, well, how can I help? Or, how can I be of support? And she said, well, I need some coaching. I said, well, so what is it you're heading for? What do you want? And she was a security guard. She said, I want to be the city manager. I said, well, tell me more about that. And she went for like half an hour. And I just sat there. And then she looked at me and I said, you got the job.
Yeah.
It's going to take 15 years to get there, but you got the job. And look at her now.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Trademarked Podcast. We hope today's conversation left you with valuable insights into employee engagement and practical tools to create a more human-connected workplace. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with a friend or colleague who might benefit. You can also follow us on our social platforms for updates, resources, and more leadership content. Your feedback means the world to us. Let us know your thoughts or suggest topics you'd like to explore in future episodes by reaching out to us via email. Until next time, keep leading with authenticity and purpose, and we'll see you in the next episode.